Welcome to The Explainer. We're diving into a pretty provocative question today. What if the story of civilization didn't begin with the invention of farming, but with a global flood that basically wiped the slate clean? We're going to explore a theory that suggests our shared history is way older and a whole lot more dramatic than we've ever been told.
You know the story we're all taught. Civilization was this slow, steady march of progress. But what if that story is just plain wrong? What if our real origin wasn't some gentle awakening, but a violent, world-changing catastrophe? That's the huge idea we're digging into today.
The standard story is the one we all learned in school, right? Humans figured out how to farm, that led to villages, and then those villages slowly grew into the first-grade cities. It's a nice, tidy, linear story of progress.
But this theory? It just flips that script completely. It argues that the real trigger for civilization wasn't some peaceful invention like the plow. No, it was a desperate fight for survival in the face of a disaster that literally changed the planet.
Okay, so before we get into the really wild stuff, let's just do a quick recap of the story we all think we know. This is the foundation that this whole new theory is trying to knock over.
So you can think of the traditional view of human history as this simple three-act play. For, thousands and thousands of years, we were just wandering hunter-gatherers. Then came the big Neolithic revolution, the discovery of agriculture, which finally let us settle down, plant some roots, and build complex societies.
And for a long time, the evidence seemed to back this up. Look at incredible sites like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. It's nearly 12,000 years old, and it shows this highly organized society popping up right around the dawn of our current geological era. It fits the timeline perfectly. But it's this very timeline that our source material says is completely wrong.
All right, so let's get to the heart of this new theory. It argues that the real spark wasn't slow progress at all. It was a sudden, violent event that completely rewrote the map of the world and forced humanity down a totally new path.
The clues for this cataclysm start deep in the Antarctic ice. This ice core data, it's like a frozen timeline of Earth's climates. And if you look right around 15,000 years ago, whoa, you see this absolutely massive, dramatic spike. This was not a gradual natural warming. It was a sudden, violent shock to the entire global climate system.
So what on Earth could cause a shock like that? Well, the theory points to a pretty dramatic cause, a massive object from space, maybe a comet or a meteor, hitting the Earth. The impact supposedly shattered the gigantic ice dams of the North, unleashing a volume of fresh water into the world's oceans that is almost impossible to imagine.
Now, a huge portion of this water cascaded into the Caspian-Aral Basin, which was already the biggest inland sea on the planet. Geologists actually call this event the Qualian transgression, but you can just think of it as the Caspian megaflood. It was so enormous it raised the water level by an estimated 200 meters. That's over 650 feet. It flooded more than 1 million square kilometers of land, creating exactly the kind of world-ending catastrophe that echoes in our oldest myths as a great flood.
Okay, so if this catastrophe was the true birth of civilization, then where exactly was its cradle? The theory points to a very, very specific part of the world.
To get this, we have to rewind our minds back to the Ice Age. During this incredibly harsh period, human life was basically squeezed into this narrow, habitable band, a kind of safe zone, stuck between the massive glaciers to the north and the bone-dry deserts to the south. And a key refuge in this zone was the relatively mild region right around the Caspian Sea.
Now, this is where our source material makes a really specific claim. It says that when the floods hit, survivors from a so-called Turan civilization in this region were forced to get up and move. The text identifies these people as Aryans, and it's important to note this is a specific historical term being used by the source material here. These survivors are said to have spread out in every direction, and they carried with them not just the trauma of the flood, but also the crucial organizational skills they had to develop to survive it.
So you're probably thinking, okay, that is a huge claim. Where's the proof? Well, the evidence this theory proposes isn't just buried in the ground in archaeological digs. It's linguistic. It's hiding in one of the most basic words we have, the word for city.
The whole linguistic argument really hinges on this one tiny but incredibly powerful ancient Turkish root word, ur, or sometimes or. Now, it started with a really simple meaning, a ditch or a trench. Probably something you dig for defense, maybe against floodwaters. But over time, its meaning evolved to mean a place of gathering, a settlement, and finally, a city.
And here is the crucial leap the theory makes.
It argues this root word didn't just stay in Central Asia. It claims this ancient Turkish root, so connected to the idea of organized survival, actually migrated and embedded itself into Latin. It eventually became the basis for core English words we use all the time, like urban, order, and organization.
But honestly, the most compelling piece of evidence, the real wow moment, comes when you just look at a map. When you start plotting the ancient cities whose names have this R root in them, a pretty stunning pattern emerges. The locations seem to trace the exact migration paths you'd expect from survivors moving away from that flooded Caspian basin. I mean, just look at this list. It's remarkable. It stretches from Urumqi, way out in the east, through the super famous Mesopotamian cities of Ur and Uruk, all the way to the ancient names for Jerusalem and even Athens in the west. It's like a trail of linguistic breadcrumbs marking the path of a single, spreading culture.
So, what does all of this mean? If this theory holds any water, it forces us to build a completely new timeline for human civilization, one that's far older and way more dramatic than we've ever imagined.
So, the crucial point here is the timeline shift. This theory places the big event, the flood, at 15,000 years ago. That's 3,000 years before the accepted end of the Ice Age and a full 9,000 years before the rise of Sumer. It suggests organized human society is thousands and thousands of years older than mainstream history accepts.
In this radical retelling, the great civilizations that we all learn about, Sumer, Egypt, they weren't the beginning of the story. They were more like a second wave, an inheritance. According to this theory, the foundational knowledge they built on came from even older, post-flood cultures, the forgotten civilizations of Turan, Iran, and Haran.
And this just completely reframes our understanding of the past. Instead of lots of different cultures inventing civilization independently all over the world, it suggests a single point origin, a mother culture, forged in the trauma of a global flood, whose descendants spread across the world and planted the seeds of all the great civilizations that would come later.
And it all leaves us with a really compelling final question. If a simple two-letter word could potentially connect our most ancient cities and rewrite our origin story, what other secrets about our deep shared past are out there, hiding in plain sight?